Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jason Beeman here at the National Weather Service in Mobile, and I'm joined by senior forecaster Don Shepard. Don, how's it going?
Hi, Jason. I'm doing good today. How are you?
Doing well. Normally during tropical season or in the preparation for tropical season, we like to come out to the communities and present tropical preparedness talks and really engage with the communities as we get ready for another hurricane season. Obviously, some things are a bit different this year, but we're going to try this virtually to share with you some information on the hurricane forecast, as well as some good preparedness tips as we go into this season. So Don, the hurricane forecast was issued earlier today by NOAA. And do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, it looks like we're going to be expecting a above average season, and it could be a well above average season. The NOAA forecast is calling for 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 of those could be major hurricanes. And all of those numbers, they're pretty much along or above the normal averages for a year of 12, 6, and 3. So all indicators are that it will be a busy season.
That's right, and the NOAA forecast, again, was just issued earlier today on this Thursday, May 21st, but it's really comparable to some of the other notable hurricane forecasts that come out from some of our colleagues in both broadcast media and also in the academic realm.
Right, pretty much all the seasonal outlooks this year, based on what everyone's looking at over the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and the waters over those oceans, all indicate a above normal forecast, and that's pretty much shown with everybody's outlook.
That's right, and there's a lot that goes into these forecasts, and a lot of factors that we're going to talk about that really determines whether the scientists and the meteorologists believe if it's going to be a below normal or potentially an above normal year. There's also some things to keep in mind about these outlooks too that we're talking about. Remember, these are outlooks for the entire Atlantic basin, not just the Gulf of Mexico, not just here on the northern Gulf Coast. So don't think that just because we're saying an active season, it means that we're going to get every single storm. We have to be prepared that we're going to get a storm this year like we do every year. But these outlooks are talking about the number of storms over a very vast, expansive area of the Atlantic. So that's just something to keep in mind. And we'll be talking about that more as we go along. So, one of the factors that we look at is whether we're going to be in El Nino or La Nina. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But currently, Don, it looks like we are trending towards a La Nina.
Right. A La Nina is cooler than normal waters in the equatorial Pacific region out in the Pacific Ocean. And we are trending toward, as you can see on the graphic here, May 18th or so, we were 0.3 of a degree Celsius cooler than what is normal for that part of the oceans there. And if you look at the graph below that, you can see we started off March and April above normal and even in El Nino type conditions with warmer than normal, but over the last couple of weeks we've dropped below normal on the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific.
That's right, and before we talk about what the seasonal forecast means, La Nina is one step of that. We have La Nina typically means busier than normal. El Nino kind of suppresses activity over the Atlantic. That's one of the tools that we look at. But I think what we really want to stress more than anything is giving a good perspective on what these seasonal forecasts mean. They can be very helpful. They get good discussion going. We want to be talking about hurricane season. We want to be talking about preparations, but they can only tell us so much. And there's a few things that they're not going to do well at, and they're not going to give us much information on. Seasonal outlooks do not provide any insight on local impacts. So again, we're not talking about the local area per se when we're talking about these seasonal outlooks. Again, it's for the entire Atlantic. We have to be in a state of preparedness, a mindset of preparedness and readiness every single hurricane season, whether a below normal season is forecast or an above normal season is forecast, because history shows us it only takes one hurricane to make landfall in our area to make it a bad season. And we have some examples of quiet years, relatively quiet years, right, that were very active for us, and then some busy seasons that were not active for us. So it's all about perspective and understanding what things really mean, Don. And certainly we've had our experiences with big hurricanes during relatively quiet years with low numbers of storms, and I think the 1997 season is an example of that.
Yeah, that's a very good example. We only had 8 named storms that year, and as you can see, most of them were out in the Pacific Ocean there, and there was only one that formed in the Gulf, and it impacted the United States. It was the only storm to impact the U.S. that year, and it was right here in Mobile, Alabama, when we had Hurricane Danny make landfall down around the mouth of Mobile Bay.
And Danny, I grew up in the local area. I know Danny very well. I remember Danny very well. And, if you're thinking about just the category of the hurricane, it's not going to give you much perspective in Danny. Danny was a Category 1, just the Category 1. We've heard that out there. But category of storm doesn't mean everything. And Don, Danny was way more than just a Category 1 hurricane.
Right. They have different hazards, and while the wind hazard was there during Danny, the main hazard that we had was just excessive rainfall with Danny, in excess of 30 inches in some areas in parts of southern Mobile County, and just some extensive flooding and flash flooding, and river flooding as well. So while it was a weaker category hurricane, you had definite major impacts across the area.
That's right. Again, growing up, I grew up in Baldwin County, and I knew we had friends that had to be rescued from the floodwaters along the Fish River. So we had just a Category 1, right? Not a big deal wind-wise necessarily. But again, if a storm sits and stalls over you and produces copious amounts of rain, it really doesn't matter what the maximum wind speed was. And Danny was a prime example of that. Look at that, almost 37 inches of rain at Dauphin Island, and widespread 1 to 2 feet of rain across the area. So again, Danny, in a very quiet year overall, not many storms, a very strong El Nino, which we would expect not many storms. So just think about it. Going into the 1997 hurricane season, if we were talking about a below normal forecast, if you hinged on that and didn't make preparations, you would not have been prepared for a Hurricane Danny. Then we switch gears to a 2005. 2005 was bad overall. Many storms, many significant, devastating impacts, Don.
Right. It was one of the busier seasons we've ever had in the Atlantic Basin there, and it was a very active season overall. You can see the map here just covered with hurricane tracks. And the thing was, it was also a very high local impact. We had 4 systems come through our area here. You had Arlene, Cindy, Dennis, and Katrina pretty much within our county warning area, the area that we're responsible for along the Gulf Coast here, are very close by, where we still had major impacts from those storms. So that's an example of an active season with a very high local impact.
That's right. And, that was a record-setting hurricane season. I'm looking here, I think it was 28 storms. We went into the Greek alphabet.
Just into the next year.
That's right, even into January, didn't it? Yeah. Briefly. Right. So yes, active seasons can bring lots of significant impacts. But does anybody remember the hurricane season of 2010? Probably not, because while we had a lot of storms, Don, none impacted the United States.
Right. It was another very active season, 20-something storms, but very few of them impacted any land really whatsoever, not just the United States. And the few that did impact the U.S. were tropical storms or depressions. Now, Danny would be an example. Even those weaker storms could have had some major flooding impacts, especially, but in general, there were no real impacts that year, no local impacts at all. But overall, as you can see from the hurricane tracks, a very busy year for the entire Atlantic Basin. And that's what these outlooks are based on, how many storms we have over the entire basin.
That's right. So an active season forecast verified quite well in 2010 as well as 2005. But the perspective of those seasons is widely different based on the impacts that were received here in the United States. But if you look in that zoom in of the map there over the Yucatan, now there were several storms in a very small area that crossed paths with the Yucatan there. So if you were in Mexico in that general area of the Yucatan Peninsula, 2010 was a busy season, but not for us in the United States. So it's all about perspective when you're talking about these hurricane season outlooks. And what about preseason storms, Don? It seems like we've had several years here recently that we've had storms in May. Is there any correlation between the number of storms in May versus what type of hurricane season it's going to be?
Not really, Jason. We have, I think the last 6 years have had an early storm. In fact, a couple of years ago, we even had one in late April that developed. But in general, if you look back through the records there, early activity does not necessarily mean an active year. Some years it's not as active when you have early activity, and some years you may have no early activity, yet a very active year. And 2004 on the top map here is a good example of that. There were no storms before August 1st when we get to the higher part, the better part of the hurricane season, the peak there. There were no storms as we went into that time of the year, but by the end of the season, we were above average and really well above average with 15 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 6 of those were major hurricanes. And we also had a large U.S. impact, and locally, our big impact from that year was Hurricane Ivan. And if you look at 2015, you got another example. There were 3 named storms before August 1st in that year, 1 even in May. And so the season ramped up quickly, but we wound up below normal with 11 named storms, 2 hurricanes and 2 major hurricanes. They remained out at sea, and there were no significant impacts to the U.S. at all.
So don't hinge your expectations on necessarily what happened in May or even June, July for that matter. If you look historically, June and July does not have a storm every year, and it does not mean that the peak of hurricane season, which is August, September, and October, will not be active. So we have to be in a mindset that it could be an active season and a mindset that we may have a storm in our area. Again, it's about that constant mental awareness and the mentality of being prepared, that readiness that we have to have each and every season. Let's talk about hurricane preparation, Don. This is big. Now it's quiet. We don't have hurricanes coming our way. And really, this quote here, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think that just speaks to everybody. And what I want to reach out to people and let them know is that preparing now can greatly reduce your stress level as you get towards a storm. If a storm comes our way, if you have an idea, if you have a plan now, you have things together, you're really going to reduce that stress level for you and your family. Don, I know we talk about preparedness every season, but we can't reiterate enough just how important it is.
Right. The earlier the better with regard to stress, being able to find supplies and things that you need to secure your home. Because again, regardless of the seasonal outlook, it's important to always be prepared and not become complacent, because it only takes that one storm.
That's right. Hurricane Michael is a great example. A couple years ago in the Panama City area, they never seen anything quite like Hurricane Michael, right? That was one of the strongest storms on record in that part of the world. They hadn't had a hurricane in a very long time. And so it just goes to show you that in any one given season, it could be our time, and we have to, again, be ready for that. So let's talk about some preparedness. And when we do this, we're going to talk about a lot of different things to consider when you're making your preparations and you're making your hurricane plan. But when you're doing this, we want you to make sure you keep in mind your furry friends, right? Your pets. They're our love, they're part of our families. And so making sure you have a plan for them as well is equally important, Don.
Right, it is. And, if you live in an evacuation zone, you have to consider those aspects as well, because some evacuation areas don't allow pets, some do. So that's something else to consider if you need to evacuate during the storm.
I'll never forget evacuating when I was young during Hurricane Elena. It was a long travel up through Baldwin County and to eventually where we evacuated, and we had pets with us. And a lot goes into managing your pets, as long as you're managing all the other things that go along with evacuation. So having that plan in place now is really going to help you out when that storm comes. So before the storm, make sure you have good sources of information. We can't stress this enough. Throughout the hurricane season, you're going to be, especially if you're on social media, you're going to be bombarded by a lot of information. Some of it really good from trusted sources of information, and some other that is really bad. And remember, anybody can create a Facebook page and make something that looks really official. And so you have to be really mindful of the information you're looking at. We encourage you to follow us at the your local National Weather Service here in Mobile on social media at NWS Mobile on Facebook and Twitter. But also make sure you're following your local emergency management agency. Particularly if you're in an evacuation area or need to learn if you're in an evacuation area. They have lots of helpful resources at a local level to get you prepared for the season. And of course, we always encourage you also to follow our local broadcast partners as well on television and social media as well. Don, trusted sources of information is imperative as you go through a hurricane season.
Yeah, it is. That's where the information that's going to be most helpful to you and most accurate information is going to come from is the trusted sources that Jason just mentioned there.
I can make a guarantee to you that the men and women here at the National Weather Service in Mobile are always going to be in the mindset of getting you ready and prepared, never to aim to scare you or to create a panic. And so you can trust us to give you the information as we're receiving it, what we think is going to happen, the potential impacts, and we're going to share that information with you as soon as we know it. So what to prepare for? Boy, there's a lot when it goes into a hurricane, many different hazards. It's not just the wind. Again, it's not just the category of the storm. You'll hear me say this until I just can't say it anymore. It's not just about the category of the storm and the wind. The wind is important. We need to prepare for it. But Don, there's a lot more that you got to consider when it comes to a tropical storm or a hurricane.
Right. The wind, tornadoes. Some storms have very few tornadoes. Some have a lot. Hurricane Ivan, which affected our area, had a record number of tornadoes. Mm-hmm. I think it was something like 117, something like that it spawned. So tornadoes are certainly a hazard. But I think the big ones, other than the wind, but the two that are the most destructive and oftentimes the most deadly involve water, both storm surge and inland flooding from heavy rain. So those are two that we really like to emphasize. And in fact, the storm surge is where most of the evacuation zones are in. People that we ask to evacuate are in storm surge zones. So the water, 60-70% of all fatalities in hurricanes occur from water and not so much the wind or tornadoes.
Yes, folks, do not underestimate the power of water. I just can't say it enough. Water, as Don said, is the main result of fatalities when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes. And it doesn't take a hurricane to produce a tremendous amount of flooding. Now, some of our most notable major flood events have come from tropical depressions and tropical storms as well. So again, don't underestimate the power of water. You have to incorporate all these different hazards and identify which ones you're going to be most vulnerable to. So if you're close to the coast, obviously evacuations may be in order depending on the storm. And it's important for you to know a couple things. It's important for you to understand, first off, are you in a surge zone? Could you potentially be impacted by storm surge? And if so, what evacuation zone are you in your county? And that's why now is the time to be answering these questions. And if you identify that you are in an evacuation zone, you got to have a plan of where to go. Right, Don?
Right. And your local emergency management folks are the ones that you contact, good sources to find out whether you are in a evacuation zone or not. And another thing to remember is if you do evacuate, and you probably need to have a couple of evacuation routes planned out because, storms change quickly, they develop quickly, and, storm surge or flooding rains could cut off some routes that you wanted to take. So at least have a couple of those planned out in advance before the hurricane.
You touched upon a couple of really good points there. It's first off, you got to constantly maintain awareness of the latest forecast. because the forecast is going to change. Take a look at Michael. Michael strengthened very quickly. So if you were not paying attention with the updates as they were coming in, it could have caught you off guard. Secondly, knowing if you're in that evacuation zone and having identified routes. As Don said, one route could be cut off, so you have to have another route just in case. Again, if you have this plan in place now and this understanding of what you would need to do during an evacuation, that stress level is really going to be reduced for you when that time comes. And as Don talked about, those local emergency management officials, they do a tremendous job. Such dedicated men and women work in local emergency management. They have tremendous amounts of resources on their websites that you can see here. Here's the coastal websites where you can find out if you are in an evacuation zone, in a surge zone. Lots of great tools, no matter where you live along the coast, from Dauphin Island all the way over to Destin. You're going to be able to find out the information for you. And keep in mind, you may not be on the immediate Gulf waters, but if you're around any of the bays or the rivers, I think about along Mobile Bay, you've got the Dog River, you've got the Fowl River, you've got the Fish River, you have Perdido Bay. All these different types of waterways that drain out into the Gulf of Mexico could easily see major surge during a storm. So make sure you check out these sources of information to understand what your local threat is where you live.
And you also, Jason, got to remember folks that live in mobile homes. Whether or not you're on the coast or inland with a hurricane and the very high winds, it's probably best if you live in a mobile home to evacuate to a more secure building.
That's right. Normally in evacuations, the talk is to hide from the wind, run from the water, right? But you have to make sure where you're taking shelter, as Don said, is a secure location that's going to be able to get you through the storm. So depending on your situation, if you're in a mobile home, it may be best again to leave that depending on the storm. Your local officials will be giving you that information as these storms come about. And we talk about safe structures, right? There's a lot you can do to strengthen and secure your home and get prepared for hurricane season now. Just some simple things that we can do around the house.
That's right, and a lot of them, can be done well in advance of hurricane season, and you really should have a habit of doing, certain aspects of this around year round, so you won't be in such a rush and have the stresses Jason talked about earlier when a hurricane is approaching. Trimming trees and bushes near your house to prevent damage from high winds is always a recommended thing. And then just buying materials that you can help secure your home with. That's
right. These are things you can do now when it's quiet, when things are quiet. Simply trimming trees back. You got large branches that you can quickly get away that may not, so they don't fall on your roof. And then for that matter, do you have any weakened trees or diseased trees in your yard that could easily come down in a tropical storm even, or a hurricane, anytime that there's strong winds? So again, yes, a lot of things you can do now to get yourself ready for when that next storm does come. And Don, we were talking about this just a little while ago, those weak links in our homes, some things that we want to make sure we pay extra close attention to where we live. Right.
You can have your windows boarded up and all the other precautions that we just talked about, but there are some major weak links that oftentimes people don't think about. One would just be cleaning out your gutters and making sure that water can flow freely away from your house, because if stuff like that gets clogged up, you may have water damage that you would not have had otherwise. And the other two here relate to the wind. Folks don't realize a lot of times the garage doors and just your doors to your home are one of the major points where wind can get into the house. Doors are more fragile than the other part of the house, and if they blow in and the wind gets in the interior of the house, it really has nowhere to go, and that oftentimes will be the catalyst to a lot more wind damage. Once you've got damage to allow the elements inside the house, damage is often much more severe.
That's right. And we've seen that in numerous storm damage surveys that we've been on over the years, whether it be tropical systems or tornadoes. And once those doors go, especially those garage doors, then again, you've invited the wind into the house. And it's all about keeping the wind out, folks. We're talking about doors, we're talking about windows. It's not the change in pressure that's going to cause the roof to come off your home. It's going to be the wind getting inside your home from either the garage, a failed garage door, or a busted window that can then get in your home and lift the roof off. So that's what we're trying to prevent when we're talking about these weak links and things we want to pay extra close attention to. And along with that, now is the time to get an insurance checkup. And what do we mean by that? Do you have the proper amount of coverage for your home and in your situation? And the only people that can answer that is you in consultation with your insurance agent. Keep in mind that a standard homeowner's policy does not cover flood damage. And Don, we really encourage everybody to look at flood insurance as well.
Right. And really, no matter if you live in an area where you think there's been a history of flooding or not, it pays to look into that because, a lot of different things can happen during a hurricane. And you could have very excessive rainfall. As we said, Dauphin Island had 36 plus inches during Hurricane Danny. So even areas with all the debris that's down, drains and stuff like that could be clogged. And with all the rain, even areas that may not have ever flooded before, you may have some issues with the excessive rainfall. So it pays to look into that, whether you're in a known flood-prone area or not.
That's right. And it's important, just make sure you know your policy. Make sure you read your policy. I just got my policy renewal here recently, and I looked over it. I made sure there was no significant changes, and I made sure that I was happy with the coverage for my situation. But every situation is different, and that's why now is a great time to make sure that you answer some of those questions, and make sure you keep your important documents with you and in a safe location, and also make sure you bring them with you in case you have to evacuate. So we're talked about a lot here, right? We've talked about getting, are you in evacuation zone, evacuation plan, securing your home, all sorts of things. But it doesn't do any good if you don't write it down. Because if you're like me, you don't write it down, you're going to forget it here very soon. So Don, it's so important that we really keep track of what our plan is to help remind us of what we need to do during those stressful times.
That's right, Jason, because, once you are in those stressful times, everybody knows from experience, it's hard to remember some of the things that you may need to do. And so if you plan and have a written plan that you can refer back to once the stress of the storm is upon you, you have a much better success rate of being able to prepare and be ready for what's about to occur.
It's all about putting yourself in the best place to succeed, right? To get through the storm in the best possible way. And that's why we think these things are so important to keep in mind. And it's also a very important thing. Obviously, we need to make sure ourselves and our families are taken care of, but check on your neighbor, right? Do you have an elderly neighbor? Do you have neighbors that don't maybe necessarily have the means, that they need some help? A storm prior to, during, and after brings out a great sense of community. And it really takes a community effort to get through a storm. So we really want to make sure that people also check on those in need as well. Right, Don?
Right. Yeah. And, a good example of that was in Panama City. The whole streets, neighborhoods got together and really had to depend on each other there for a good, 7 to 10 days, at least, so, just always give a helping hand. It's appreciated. And it's just, the neighborly thing to do, and it helps everybody out.
So also an important thing in all of this is assembling your disaster supply kit, your emergency preparedness kit. And there's a lot of things that go into that. That's why you need to be thinking about it now. Your food and water, you probably heard several times from emergency officials, at least the first 72 hours are on you. Because think about after a storm, there could be extensive power loss. There could be many downed trees, hard to get into different locations. It could be a lot of damage around. And emergency officials are going to basically have to work their way into areas, and they're not going to be able to get to everybody all at one time. So you have to have reliance on your supply kit to get you through those hours after the storm. So food, water, but also medicine is key. Make sure you have a proper amount of medicine on hand prior to a storm. Batteries. Make sure your vehicle is fueled, because we all know, and we've all heard about the gas. If the gas stations don't have power, you can't get gas. So all sorts of different things to keep in mind as well. And Don, we're going to talk a little bit more about the supply kit. Lots of things to consider when you're building your kit.
Yeah, anything, from having batteries for radios and flashlights and stuff like that in the aftermath of the storm, when you likely will not have power. Cell phone chargers, that type things, and even extra clothes and shoes and stuff that you don't really think about. You may wind up, as is often the case in some of these events, you may wind up with just the clothes on your back. So be prepared and have some extra of all this stuff set aside into your emergency supply kits. And also remember a kit for your car and your vehicle. Mm-hmm. Jumper cables, anything to help you with getting around when you need to after the hurricane. And one big thing I think that people don't think about is, I know in Michael there was tons of debris everywhere, and just about everybody had a flat tire at least once, and most people had them numerous times. So you're trying to do your recovery work, and you never have a good set of tires on your car. So fix a flat or tire repair kits are essential to remember in that as well. And also have the cash once the gas pumps are working, on generator or whatever. There still may not be power, so you may not be able to use your credit card. So always have a good amount of cash on hand, plus the food and water for everyone in the house for at least 3 days.
That's right. And another thing to consider, we're going through a pandemic right now, and that's something that we have to be very mindful of. And the advice of the CDC and emergency officials is you also want to include in your kit this year, especially if you have to evacuate and there may be a shelter situation that you have to go to a shelter. At least have 2 face masks, face coverings for you, a hand sanitizer. These things we're going to keep in mind as we go through this pandemic, and keep in mind that depending on where we are in this pandemic, when a storm comes, things are probably going to be flexible, and things are going to change from a local official's standpoint, that you're going to have to make sure you stay in tune to your local officials and understand what the plan is at that time, again, given where we are in the pandemic. But something that we have to make sure that we take very seriously. So you got to build it and you got to maintain it. I think it says it all, Don.
Yeah, it does. And again, that goes back to year round. Just keep that kit updated and everything in it fresh and ready to go year round, and that way you're always ready for when the hurricane or the tropical storm comes your way.
That's absolutely right. So, during the storm, so we were preparing for the storm, but there's things to keep in mind, and we want you to be prepared for when the storm happens, right? So when the storm's making landfall, that is a time to hunker down. You stay away from windows. You don't want to be caught by flying debris. That is very important. And also be expecting, some severe disruptions possibly to some of our things that we come to expect on a daily basis, like power, right? Power, phone service, roadways, your routes may be cut off or down trees, or maybe they're flooded, or maybe, a road has washed away. We don't know. There could be water and sewer issues as well, especially if we've had a significant flood event. A lot of things that can happen during the storm, but the most important thing is to stay hunkered down until the storm passes.
Right, and if you're unfortunate enough to get the eye of the storm, you don't want to start wandering around outside, when the winds calm down, because just as quickly as they subsided, they're going to increase again and be from the other direction on the backside of that storm. And if you do venture outside, you certainly don't want to get too far away from very good structure to hunker back down in when the backside of the storm gets there.
And something to know for people, if we have the unfortunate circumstance, we have a major hurricane make landfall in our area, as the eye wall is moving ashore, we will issue something called an extreme wind warning. And that will alert on your cell phones. If you have a newer cell phone, it'll alert weather radios. It'll scroll across televisions. That basically means that the eye wall of the major hurricane is making landfall and the worst conditions are coming in that can be very damaging and devastating. So we want you to treat it like a tornado situation. Lowest floor of your home, interior room, put as many walls between you and the outside as possible. So if you see an extreme wind warning issued and you see that alert come on your phone, you'll know what it is and how to be safe. This warning was issued during Hurricane Michael over in the Panama City area. So it is something that could possibly happen here, that it's important to be mindful of. And it's all about that hunkering down when the worst of the storm is approaching.
Right. It's kind of a last call, giving you your last chance to get into the most secure area, and when that time should be.
That's right. And then after the storm, Don, a lot of things that we need to keep in mind after the storm as well.
Right. Particularly if you have evacuated, you need to wait for an official all clear before attempting to return to your home. A lot of times, just based on the damage, they're not going to be letting you come right back in. So wait till you hear that all clear from officials, and also be prepared to show some kind of proof of ID, that you live in that area and that you are a resident. But other than listening to your local officials, use your telephones if they're available, texting to contact family and friends and let people know where you are and how you're doing. But I think some of the main things would be to watch out for debris and down power lines, that type thing, and stay out of damaged buildings and homes until authorities say that it's okay to go into them.
And even if your home isn't damaged, avoid the curiosity factor of wanting to go see how bad it is, because you could clog the roadways and prevent emergency officials from getting to where they need to go to help those people in need. So just be patient. Wait for things to improve before you start venturing out too much, I think is critical as well. Another thing I noticed on here, you photograph any damage you have to your property. That will greatly help you in the insurance claim process following the storm as well.
Right, and going back to that too, you want to take all these photographs before you do anything, before you do any cleanup or repairs, so they have an idea of what the damage actually looked like before you start making repairs. That helps them in their estimates that they will give. And also just make a list of that damage and lost items, and that way it's easier to keep up with everything that you would need to have replaced. And as soon as you can, call your insurance agent and submit a claim. It may, after a major hurricane, when it's very widespread, it may take you a while. For instance, in Panama City, several people, the damage was so severe and the communications were so disrupted, it took them a week or two, some of the folks, to even get in touch with their insurance agents. So just be patient with it and be ready to give them all the information and all the data you can when you do get in touch with them.
That's right. And we see the blue tarp. We don't want to see the blue tarps. We don't want to have to think about that. But obviously, a big storm comes through. It's going to bring a lot of damage. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to temporarily patch up until you can make more permanent repairs. So tarps, Don, just one of the many examples of things that you could need after a storm.
Right. Yeah. That could be one of the primary things, really, because again, depending on how widespread, you can see in the picture here, essentially every roof in this neighborhood had damage, and you multiply that over a county area. So you may be depending on something like a blue tarp to keep the elements out of your house for months. So it's always pays to have some of those on hand to make your little emergency repairs to keep the weather out once the storm is over.
I think it's important here. Be careful using those heavy duty tools. If you're not used to using a chainsaw or you have very limited experience, be very careful. A lot of injuries happen after a storm in the cleanup process, whether it be from falling debris, maybe a structure giving way, or just improper use of one of those heavy pieces of equipment. So we want everybody to be safe out there when operating or doing this post-storm cleanup. don't get past your limits. Don't push it. If you're not comfortable with it, then find somebody else that can help you in that effort.
And I think also be mindful, of down power lines and stuff like that. As they start turning power on, the situation becomes more dangerous if there's still a lot of lines and stuff down on the ground. So be mindful of those and know where they are and stay away from them, whether you think the power is on or off.
That's right. Good point. When we talk about the power, again, the power restoration process could take a long time depending on how significant the system is. As Don alluded to, avoid power lines. They may still be live, and you could be seriously injured or killed if you come across a live power line that's down. So make sure you keep children away from these down power lines as well. Again, that's why you don't venture out. Just stay inside and stay safe until the response effort can get to you and start restoring some things. But some other things to consider as well, Don, when the power is going to come back up.
Right. If you're fortunate enough to have a generator, you're going to be wanting to use that. But there are certain things you do and do not want to do when you have a generator in use. And one of the main things is don't plug your generator directly into your household sockets. That's not going to work for you. And the other thing is when you do see the utility crews coming and working in your neighborhood, for their safety and yours, it's best to have your generators off when they're working in your area.
That's right. Be safe with power. Be safe with electricity. It's something that you can never be too mindful of. And again, that generator safety is a huge thing. We've seen a lot of people get in trouble over the years during and after a hurricane situation. There's definitely a proper way to use generators, Don, and definitely a unsafe way to use them as well.
Right, and the thing is, these are gas operated, so there's an exhaust that comes out of those. So the exhaust obviously contains the carbon monoxide. And if you set that generator up too close to your house or up under a porch or in a garage, you're getting that carbon monoxide. And, eventually, if enough of that builds up, you're not going to be able to get your oxygen. And, unfortunately, over the years, we've had some deaths after hurricanes just simply from people putting their generators either too close to their house or even in their house. We've heard some reports of people actually inside the house, and it's a very loud unit. So
yeah, it is.
Have it out away from the house where there's good airflow and away from your doors and vents and that type thing, because that can be a major hazard after a storm.
Excellent information. And again, a lot of information we've thrown at you here today. It's a lot to consider when we get preparing for hurricane season. But there's a one-stop shop that you can find all of your tropical information needs, and that's right at the National Weather Service webpage. There's a link here on the slide that you can go straight to our tropical weather page. Also, if you just go to weather.gov/MOB, we'll have a link right at the top of our page to our tropical section that we'll have throughout hurricane season. And it's really a place that you can get all the information, the latest forecast track, the latest information on watches, warnings, the latest information on storm surge, preparedness links, Don, a lot of great information here on this page.
Right, and it's information that comes, from more of the national level, the Hurricane Center, all the way down to our local level right here in our Mobile area, in the areas that we're responsible for, which include, portions of interior Southeast Mississippi, Southwest Alabama, and the Western Florida Panhandle.
That's right. And as Don said, we're taking the information from the National Hurricane Center, the forecast of the storm, and we're taking all that and we are breaking it down for us locally. What are the potential local impacts that we have to be prepared for? And the cool thing about this tropical page, during a storm, if you go to the Threats and Impacts tab, we give you a simple color-coded scale to let you know what the threat level is for winds, storm surge, flooding rain, and tornadoes. You can click on where you are on the map, and it will give you all the information you need on what your local threat is and what you need to prepare for. And I think it's really important to understand that it's not just about the forecast cone. It's not just about the center of the storm. A tropical storm and hurricane can be very large, and the impacts can expand over a very large area. So don't get too caught up in exactly where the center is or how or what category it is. It's all about those local potential impacts.
Yeah, and it gives you an idea of which impact may be greater in your area too. So
that's right.
Maybe what to be prepared for more so than another. You need to be prepared for everything going into the season, but in the actual storm, you may have one impact that's greater than another.
Again, it's a lot of information. It's a lot to consider. And please know that we are a resource to you all through the season, throughout the year. And there's lots of great ways you can stay in touch with our information on our website, weather.gov/MOB. Again, on our Facebook and Twitter at NWS Mobile. And also, we'll share some YouTube helpful videos. This video will be on YouTube as well, NWS Mobile. You're always welcome to call us as well if you have any concerns. We are here to provide information, to provide reliable information to help you and your families. And so know that we are part of the community as well. We have just as much investment on seeing everybody prepared and safe as anybody else. We are all in this together. Don, we've been through many hurricane seasons here. Each season's a little different, but again, that constant mentality of being prepared is so important. I know our experiences have told us that we have to be prepared each year.
Yeah, we do. And even though the outlook for this year is an above normal season, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have a local impact, but it reminds you that you need to be prepared for if and when we do have a local impact.
That's right. And we hope you enjoyed the information today. We hope to hopefully produce a few more videos to talk more about the specific threats that we could see from a hurricane, different tools that you can use to help understand your risk level. So be looking for those here in the coming weeks. But again, we hope you all stay safe, you all get ready, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Take care.